and I and my boat were immediately and completely submerged by the water. And I made a very conscious choice at that point, and I asked very clearly that God's will be done. And the minute that I asked that, I was enveloped with a very physical sensation of being held and comforted and reassured that everything was fine. My spirit broke free from my body, and I rose up and out of the river, and I was immediately greeted by a group of spirits, beings, angels, and they began taking me down this exceptionally beautiful path toward this great dome structure of sorts that I knew was the entrance to heaven.
Dr. Mary Neal tells her extraordinary story in her book, To Heaven and Back, which has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 17 weeks now. Mary, when you got there, what did heaven look like?
There are no words, of course, to truly describe it. And the words we use don't quite make sense, because when I think about what it looked like infinite, unconditional love, kindness, and of course beauty. This great hall of sorts exploded with color and beauty and an absolute and pure love of God.
What did the spirits look like? Were they in sort of human form? Were they sort of ethereal? And did you recognize anybody there?
Well, the spirits that greeted me were people I had known and loved as long as I existed, and I knew they had known me and loved me as long as I had existed. But it was very interesting. They had physical form, head, arms, body, and they were radiant. They were brilliant. I knew that they were from God and of God, but it's funny, of course, I wish I had taken notes about, okay, now, let me get a good look at you. But it's hard to understand now. At the time, it wasn't important to me to spend time identifying each and every one of them, because I wanted desperately to get to this entrance of heaven, and it was as though we had plenty of time to chit-chat and catch up later.
And in the meantime, you're underwater, and I understand your knees broke and made your legs limp, and that helped the water push you or
well, the water,
out of the kayak, right?
Well, I was underwater, upright in the boat, and absolutely pressed to the front deck of the boat, and the current ultimately sucked my body out of the boat. And in doing that, my knees bent back on themselves. And during that time period, it was very interesting, because I was being held, I believe, by Christ and reassured, and went through a bit of a life review, not so much looking at events, but looking at all the unseen ripple effects of those events. And I could feel my knees bending back on themselves, and I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I thought about that, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't have pain. I know my bones are breaking. I don't have fear. I don't have panic. I knew that I had been underwater too long to be alive, but I felt more alive than I've ever felt.
But 15 minutes, how is that possible that you were submerged underwater for 15 minutes?
Well, if you talk to the people who resuscitated me, they would actually say that it was more like 30 minutes. I tend to go with 15 minutes because that was an absolute 15 minutes on the clock. And that is too long scientifically to be alive. And although my kids might say otherwise, I didn't suffer brain damage. And
meanwhile, though, and then when you return to your physical body, I know that you were told it's not your time. You returned to your physical body, and how did you feel when you got back and you realized you were here?
I was not happy about it. I had absolutely no desire to return. And two of the things that were surprising to me about heaven, and I have to say that I didn't really have any preconceptions about what dying might be like or what it might be like after I died. I was surprised by the fact that despite my wonderful family, I love my husband, I love my children more than I can imagine loving something on earth. I looked back at my body as they were doing CPR, and I was not coming back. In fact, one of the people who was doing CPR was a young man, kept calling me back to take a breath, and I would intermittently be overwhelmed with compassion for him. I would go back and take a breath and then leave. And it was interesting because I became so irritated with him
Because
for
you wanted to be
continuing
free.
to keep calling me back. And he, as it turns out, was so irritated with me because I would take a breath and then stop.
Well, I know that later when you were in the hospital, you began to have visions, and one of them involved your son, really a terrifying prediction about him. We're going to find out what that was when we come back. We're back now with Dr. Mary Neal, whose best-selling book, To Heaven and Back, chronicles her vision of the afterlife following a near-death experience. Mary, I know you get to the hospital and you start to, you continue to have sort of these visions. And in one of these visions, you're told something about your son. What was it, and with whom were you speaking at the time?
I was speaking with Christ. And that sounds a little presumptuous always for me to say out loud, but that was one of the truly remarkable things about my experiences, really coming to this realization and understanding of how that's true, that God really loves and knows each and every one of us, which is something that's difficult to understand.
I should point out that you were not religious. I mean, you were raised a Presbyterian, you would go to church occasionally, but you were not a person of deep faith, really.
No, I perhaps should have been, but I think I was very typical. You know, I had a busy life. I had a husband, 4 children, full-time job, and I did claim to be a Christian, and I certainly did go to church, but I was not overly religious.
So
And
what were you told when you were in the hospital, Mary?
well, I was told a couple of things, several things, given somewhat mandates for my life, one of which had to do with my expected role at the time of my oldest son's death. And I had been told by my son when he was quite young that he would not live beyond 18.
He told you that?
He told me that many years prior, and so when I was told this as one of the reasons for my return to Earth, it did not come as a surprise.
That you had to be there to comfort your family because your oldest son was going to die?
It was not so much comforting my family as much as it was fulfilling a role for not just my family and community, but really the community in a more broad sense of showing people how to find the beauty in what would otherwise be considered a tragedy. Because the fact is there's always beauty.
10 years after this happened then, when your son, Willie, your oldest child, was 19, what happened?
He was roller skiing. It's a dry land form of cross-country skiing, and he was hit by a car and killed instantly.
Had you told anybody about this conversation you had, this experience you had in the hospital?
Just before my son's 18th birthday, I was really anxious about it, and I finally told my husband. And I won't say that he was happy that I told him, but I told him, and then actually on his 18th birthday, I told my son. And
you told Willie?
I did, because I truly believed at that point that God's plan for his life had changed.
And what did he say?
Well, he thought it was interesting, but he noted the fact that he did turn 18, and I think he thought it was interesting. And in fact, the day that he died, during the roller ski with a friend, he told his friend about this story.
What do you hope people take away from your experience and this book?
Well, what I really hope is to, first of all, fulfill one of my mandates, which is sharing this story with others. And I hope that through reading my book, which is talking about life after death, but it's even more talking about how to find God in your own life, I hope that people make this transition from faith to an absolute trust that all the promises of God are true. It's hard to understand, but God really does love each one of us intensely, have a plan for each one of us, and we need to be about the business of figuring out what that is and not wasting our time. I feel like if people can really just accept that there really is life after death and forget their fear of death, they can more fully engage in life.
Well, Dr. Mary Neal, it's really interesting to talk to you, and I so appreciate your coming by.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary.
I really appreciate it.
When we come back, a boy says he also knows that heaven is for real because he saw it with his very own eyes. Today we're talking about heaven. Colton Burpo was just a little boy when he had a near-death experience that would change his life forever. Take a look. At first glance, Colton Burpo looks like an average American kid. A 13-year-old from a close-knit family living in Imperial, Nebraska. But what Colton says happened to him is anything but ordinary.
The main thing that I remember is that I got to see Jesus, my great-grandfather Pop, my sister who's already there, and then I also got to meet David, Samson, and two of the apostles, Peter and John.
Colton's memories from 9 years ago, when just shy of his 4th birthday, he fell gravely ill.
By the time the doctors realized what he was really suffering from, he'd been poisoned by about 5 days, and that led to him being just so terribly sick.
The cause was a burst appendix. Colton was rushed into emergency surgery, and it was during that surgery that he says he had an astonishing experience, a trip to heaven.
That's when he talks about sitting on Jesus' lap, the angels singing to him. I think a lot of people think sometimes miracles are reserved for like special people. And my family's very normal. Colton's a normal kid. But I think we just serve an extraordinary God who wants to show himself and make himself known in people's lives.
Colton's astounding story about his journey to heaven inspired the best-selling book, Heaven is for Real, which has been read by more than 7 million people. Colton is here today with his father, Todd, who wrote the book, and his mom, Sonia. Hi. Nice to see you all. So, Colton, I know that you didn't tell your dad about your experiences right away. It took a while. How did you explain to him what you had experienced?
Well, actually, right after I came out of surgery, when I got back from heaven, I tried to share the story with my dad. It's just he didn't want to listen because he didn't want me to give up because I was fighting to stay alive.
And what did you tell him? What did you want to share with him?
I just wanted to share my experience of heaven with him, tell him what I saw.
And did you see, we've been talking about this story with our staff. Did you see animals or pets in heaven? Because a lot of people want to know that.
Yes, I did.
You did? In what form?
Well, they have pretty much every single animal we have here on Earth, like dogs, yes, cats.
Not a cat person, apparently.
Even like lions, elephants, pretty much every single animal here on Earth is up in heaven. No, I'm not sure if your pet made it to heaven, but I know there are pets in heaven.
What did you think, Todd, when your son started talking this way?
I was questioning. I was not prepared to have even these conversations with my son. And what do you ask? People say, but you're a pastor. Yeah, and I'd like to say that I embraced this, but I didn't. I questioned it first, too. And just like he said, in the hospital, he said, Dad, I almost died. When he first started talking, he didn't say, hey, I'm into heaven, I saw Jesus. It scared me. because I didn't. Yeah, and I'd like to say that I embraced this, but I didn't. I questioned it first too. And just like he said, when in the hospital he said, "Dad, you know, I almost died." When he first started talking, he didn't say, "Hey, I'm into heaven, I saw Jesus." It scared me because I didn't know if my son was going to make it. And so I wasn't ready. It wasn't until later that we started talking, and then he could see where I saw you in the hospital, what I was doing while he was in surgery, and those things, I realized, wow, okay, you can't make this up. He had to be telling the truth.
And then, Sonia, you heard something that made you think, oh my gosh, this experience must have been legitimate. What happened?
He announced to us that he had 2 sisters, and he did not know I had miscarried. Sorry, it's real tough to talk about, but I had miscarried on Father's Day weekend, and he did not know that we had. How do you tell a 3-year-old or even anybody that you lost a baby? And when he said he had 2 sisters and he actually saw her, and at that point we didn't even know if it was a he or she, and just to know that I have a daughter waiting for me in heaven, it just solidified that he went.
And you all never discussed this in front of Colton at all?
No, not at that age. I mean, how do you explain to 3-year-olds without scaring them? Babies die in their mommy's tummies. It's just not natural to have that. Maybe when they get older you talk about it, but not when he was that young.
I mean, we weren't even telling our friends until a little bit later. I mean, it's a silent, quiet hurt that it's hard to share. And so, how do you break it to a little one in terms they can understand?
Meanwhile, Colton, you also say that you actually encountered Satan during your experience. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I never encountered him. I just saw an image of him. And people
What was
have
that like? What did he look like?
Well, I saw him in 2 forms. One, a 7-headed dragon with 10 crowns, or pretty much just a huge archangel, but he didn't have a halo over his head. He lost that a long time ago.
And when you heard that, did you think, well, you know, I'm a pastor, I'm a very religious person, I talk about things all the time, I discuss good and evil with my family, that this is something that Colton might have been hearing and listening to, and as a result had some kind of frame of reference?
Well, in my children's program in church, we don't get into Revelations and all the imagery. And I remember him asking me, "Dad, why do I remember 7 heads and 10 crowns? That doesn't make sense." And if you look into Revelations, John describes a dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns. And I'm like, okay, I know he didn't read that. He couldn't even read at the time. And so to me, it was just more confirmation that what he saw, he was not inventing.
Meanwhile, 7 million books have been sold. Do you ever, and you have a book of devotionals that is coming out as well, you did a children's book. Do you ever worry about sort of the commercial aspect of this? If this is such a profound experience for your son and such a spiritual experience, that somehow profiting from it is unseemly?
Well, I think a lot of people, that's their first maybe thought. But we have so many people that ask us, we need to know more. This is helping us. Is there more to the story? And when you talk to adults, how do you talk to children? How many children need to know about heaven? And I think only a child can really communicate to children. We have so many more requests. You know, our first habit is to go back to life and let us just do life like we did. And for us, we're responding to all the requests. We need to know more, and that's what we're doing.
And Todd, I know that after Colton told you the story, you all would look at images of Jesus to see if this is in fact the person he saw. And you used to show him a variety of images, and then one day, I understand you showed him this painting. And what did he say to you?
You know, he just looked at me. First of all, he didn't say anything. I said, "Colton, what's wrong about it?" He goes, "Dad, that's right." And he's such a particular, exacting kid. That is the only image that he's ever said that's right.
Well, up next, we're going to meet the amazing young artist who painted this. Her story is equally incredible. We'll be right back. And welcome back. You know, we were just talking about this portrait of Jesus before the break. It's called Prince of Peace and featured in the book Heaven is for Real. You may be surprised to learn the age of the artist and her heavenly inspiration.
For art prodigy Akiana Couric,
heaven has always been in the details. Her paintings, complex, vibrant, and inspired by an astonishing spiritual connection. At just 4 years old, Akiana began to have visions of being in heaven and meeting God. She began translating those visions onto paper. Most extraordinary, the concept of God hadn't even been introduced to Akiana as a child. Her parents were self-described atheists. At 6, she turned to painting, bringing her heavenly visions to life through her art.
I get up at 4:30 every morning and I do art at 5. Then I do probably 2 to 3 hours.
Homeschooled and self-taught, she continues to paint 6 days a week, and today has produced more than 200 paintings, all influenced by the same faith and heavenly inspiration that she has carried from childhood.
When I paint, for example, the cleansed eyes, and some people say it's not religious, but I know inside it is everything I do that has a meaning of spirituality.
Now, Akiana was just 10 years old in that video. She's now 18, and some of her paintings are worth more than $1 million. Akiana, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, it's an honor.
So you were just 4 years old when you believe you started hearing voices from heaven.
Yes, and I just came in through a family that was not religious at all. But when I started receiving these visions at 4, it was just way too complex to describe them through words, and the only thing I could use was colors.
You started painting and
Absolutely,
drawing.
Yeah.
And this is the Principice, which I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And you were only, I cannot believe this, 8 years old when you painted this?
I was, but the image came to me ever since I was 3.5, 4 years old. But it was like a blurry, image. But it was only when I was 8 years old when this carpenter came knocking on our door when I said, this is the perfect time to paint the story of love, unity, and peace.
A carpenter, of course.
So
that when I heard that, I was like, wow, okay,
And
that
actually-
makes sense.
And actually, some researchers actually analyzed my work, and they compared the Shroud of Turin with my work, this particular painting, and they said it was almost 80 to 90% accuracy.
So tell me about this next painting. You were how old when you painted this?
This is when I was 10. It's called Creation, and this actually happened by accident. It was a time where I just let myself go, and somehow this place came about, and I just remembered that this was the place I used to visit as a child.
And your dad's in the audience, your dad, Mark. And hi, Mark. What did you think? As Akiana said, you guys were not a religious family at all. When she started talking about this and painting these things, what was your reaction?
At first, I didn't understand where this came from. We weren't, I was an agnostic, my wife's an atheist, and we didn't speak it in the house. But to this day, I still can't figure it out. But I was just shocked.
Have you changed? Are you now more religious as a result of Akiana's work?
Yeah, I'm more, yeah. There is life after death. Yeah.
Let's go to, sorry?
There is life after death.
Well, that's what a lot of people I know think and are wondering a lot more, I think, after watching this show. Tell me about this final painting.
This is actually called I Am, and it was one of the most hardest painting that I've ever done. I think it's because based on the question of who are we, why are we here, and what's this place about?
This took 6.5 months to paint?
6.5 months, and I think it's because I just wanted to capture that moment of self-realization of who we are and why are we here, and that's when I wanted to capture this painting, because I know that everybody's so, in my opinion, everybody's perfect. Everybody is irreplaceable and unique, and I want people to get inspired by looking at this painting.
I know you have fewer visions now. Does that worry you?
It does a little bit, but I know that it will come naturally as I get older, because when I was younger, this voice told me just to be prepared not to receive anymore. I know it's going to come sooner or later.
Well, your paintings are extraordinary, to say the least. Akiana, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, Mary, Colton, and Akiana will answer some of your questions about heaven.